All right, so what we're going to do is I want you guys to work with me on this Lecture6 demo files. It's a project folder, very simple project folder. It's basically the helix and the sphere that I showed on my slides. We're going to go in and we're going to give the helix and the sphere different material properties, kind of get a feel for how the primary specular section of the Pixar surface works. So if you haven't done so, download the Lecture6 demo files RM22. All right, I got mine right here. Let me get rid of old files that are in there. There we go. So you'll be opening up, once you set your project, you will open up the helix sphere RM22. So we're going to fire up ye olde Maya. Alright, and now I'm going to set my project. Alright, good. And open scene. Now, if you've set your project correctly, when you open the scene up, it should have an HDR of the Zen garden that we used for the interior. Should have a ground plane, a helix, and a sphere, and there's actual light in there already. So the only thing that we need to do is assign a Pixar surface to the helix in the sphere and a separate Pixar surface to the ground plane, because now we want to differentiate between materials. Now we're going to treat the helix and the sphere as the same thing, just so we can see reflections in the other, but the ground is going to have its own Pixar surface. So I'm going to select the helix and the sphere, right click, assign a Pixar surface. We're going to leave it with the default value of 0.18, kind of like we did in the Zen garden exterior. And I'm going to rename that so I know what material is assigned to what object. Now, in this material phase, you guys will want to label all your materials, because it's real easy to get like Pixar surface 1 through Pixar surface 70. All right, and you're not going to remember what 48 is or 52. So name as you go. It's much simpler. Now, am I going to hawk you and go, hey, I opened your scene up and you didn't name Pixar surface 77? No, but if I want to say to you, let's adjust that sofa material, and you open up your Hypershade and it's got like 75 Pixar surface numbers in there, I'm going to go relabel them and then come back and I'll help you, because that's just a waste of time. All right, so I'm going to rename this helix, sphere. I'll abbreviate it because I'm lazy. And going to select the ground plane, give it its own Pixar surface. Just going to call it ground. All right, you guys know about viewport rendering? Okay, yeah, I haven't shown it to you until now, only because it's a nice thing to have that Pixar did, but it doesn't accurately show light or materials or textures. But basically, I'll show you what it does. See that little blue R in your upper left corner of your viewport? That will stop and start RenderMan rendering in the viewport. So if I click it once, now it is actually showing me what the objects look like with Pixar surface on it and lighting. Now the nice thing is, as I move my scene, it redraws fairly quickly. It's a little bit faster than IPR. It's a little bit dirtier, a little bit noisier. It's really good if you want to assign a material and just make sure that like your lighting is there, your material's sort of there. Everything seems to be working. Now, to stop it, click the little blue R. This time it's got a white box around it. Click it again, it'll shut it down for you. Now, to be honest, when we get into actually adding materials, I'm going to be using IPR because it is more accurate. But this is real good, down and dirty. I want to see real quick. Now, another good thing about this, and I know I'm saying how bad it is, but there are some really good attributes. When I click on it, I can still select objects in the viewport. Like I can select the sphere. And I can go in and make changes to the sphere, or I can click on the helix or the ground plane. I have full control over objects in my scene. Theoretically, you could model, though I wouldn't if I were you. Unless you're keen on Maya crashing. But it does have some cool attributes. Alright, so I'm going to turn that off. If you want to return to the view that I gave you in here, I've got this bookmark. I mean, it's not the greatest composition, but if you just want to get back for a reference point when you're doing IPR renders and you can compare. Alright, so what I'm going to do is just fire up IPR. Let's get a baseline going here. There we go. And now I can start playing around with the material. So I'm going to click on my Pixar surface. So Pixar surface, the diffuse, as you can see, the gain is at 1. That means we have full diffuse properties. Everything else in the material is shut down. So underneath diffuse is primary specular. Primary specular is by default set to artistic. So if I want to start playing around with reflective properties, first thing I'm going to do is take my edge color and turn it all the way up. Now notice what it does here on the edges. Let me turn it back down. I'll stop my IPR, click it on it again, and then turn on edge color just so we can compare back and forth between what's going on with edge color and not. So now as I turn edge color on, that's basically the 90-degree viewing angle from the camera. So just right away, as soon as you do that, the material starts to come to life, really. It's no longer a default gray fuzzball. Now, if I want to start having the object part that's facing the camera start to become reflective, that is face color. So I'm going to stop this, turn IPR back on just so I can compare. Once I get a couple iterations in there, I'm going to start turning up face color little by little, because face color a little bit goes a long way, as you guys will see. So I'll turn it up a little. Now, as soon as I turn up a little, I can start to see that specular highlight. Start to turn it up more. It starts to show me some environment reflections in there, and I'm not even halfway up. Turn it up a little bit more. It starts to get more reflective. Now, to be honest, at halfway, that is a pretty reflective material. So I would say that not most, but a good deal of your materials will be made with probably that face color under halfway. Now, what happens when you turn it all the way up? That. It's like glaring bright white. Now, what kind of property would you say that has? Kind of chromy, yeah, a little bit. There's a couple things, though, that are off if we're trying to make metal or chrome. Not as sharp, so that would be roughness. So this is your default roughness. So let me stop that, kick off IPR again. So we can have a baseline of what the roughness looks like. That is base Pixar surface roughness. Now, as I start to turn roughness down, my reflections are going to start to get sharper. Now notice what happens with my highlight also. That highlight coming from my distant light starts to get smaller and smaller because that is not being spread out either. So my reflections get much more crisp and sharp. So if I turn it all the way off, which is, something you probably would never do, because every object has some imperfections in it. I always like to leave at least 0.01, 0.02 roughness in there, maybe even a little higher, just so it adds a little realism. Because remember, if it's too perfect, it's CG. All right, so here's the baseline roughness, and here is roughness turned down. Now, that's with my face color cranked all the way up. Now, at this point, with face color turned all the way up, you would say, all right, so we must have shut down the diffuse part of the material. Because we turned face color all the way up, and we can only have 100% of the energy at any one time in any part of the material. And I would say, yes, that's how it should work. But there's always a little bit of bleed coming in through the diffuse. That means if I were to change the diffuse color, the material, you would be able to see that color change in the material. So if I made this green, you'd be able to see it has green in it. So there is diffuse coming through. Now, what happens if I turn diffuse off? And if I can do that, I can go to gain and just turn it off. Now, this looks more like your chrome. Notice that it got darker, it got richer, it's got more detail in it. And that's because once we shut off that diffuse, we are now dealing with nothing but primary specular. Does that make sense? Now, this kind of leads us up in a few minutes to making metal, because making metal, we shut the diffuse down. We don't want any of that bleeding over into our metal. We want all the properties that we put into it, the refraction index, extinction coefficient, we want all those to define what we're seeing as far as reflectivity goes. All right, questions so far? Everybody with me? All right, so what I'm going to do at this point is turn my diffuse gain back up, and I'm going to turn down my face color so it starts to behave more like a material. All right, now, something you're going to realize pretty quickly. We talked a little bit about this in color in light. It saturates very easily. Certain colors in the color picker, like that vibrant lime green, that's going to be really super vibrant. And usually we start toning down the saturation and we add a little bit of value in it, so it doesn't hurt your eyes. Well, it's also depending on your reference. There are very few objects that you will find that look like this in real life. Maybe, you know, those lime green tennis balls you see, they're almost like day glow. You know, hold them under a black light and they would glow. But that's about it. Most of the time our colors are going to be much more muted than you probably think. Right, now, what I'm going to do is break the connection in the color by simply dragging the slider left and right. And basically that just gets rid of the color and sets it back. I'm going to go back in and give it the 0.18 value, because I still want to talk about just reflectivity now. All right, so the default roughness of 0.2, that goes for artistic and physical as well. Now, at any point, if you want a solid diffuse material, just turn off the edge color, turn off the face color, and you're back to where you were, diffuse. All right, so we talked a little bit about the primary specular channel. Let's explore what's left in the diffuse channel. So we talked about gain, that shuts off, whether the diffuse adds any contribution to the reflectivity. And we talked about color. We haven't talked about roughness. Now, diffuse roughness is different than specular roughness, if that makes sense at all. Now, it's really strange because when we talk about a diffuse material, we're talking about the microscopic irregularities. They scatter light in all directions. It's rough. How can it get any rougher? Yeah.
So take the mouse and you're modeling it and your material in it. So what would the smudges be? So
smudges are mattes. They're going to be rough.
So that would be the height.
Well, no.
And you're normal. It's the normal map, right?
No, because normal map is a height map of time. It's going to be a roughness map in conjunction with a face color map, or a spec map, as we call it. That spec map controls how reflective it is. The roughness controls how rough it is. So you have a map to control each one of those so you can fine tune it. Now, sometimes we get away with just a roughness map because we go in and we globally want the whole surface to be more reflective or less reflective. But for your smudges, dirt maps, it could be a combination of diffuse, spec, and roughness. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when we get into talking about glass, that's when I'll talk about a diffuse map. Because if it's transparent, you need something to knock out some of the transparency. Because with a smudgy fingerprint on glass, it's not going to be completely transparent. It's going to be blocked by the grime, the dirt. So what do you fill in if it's blocked and not transparent? You fill it in with diffuse. So, yeah, we'll get into maps, but we put maps in with textures because that's an external feature. Right now we're dealing with global surface quality. We're going to fine-tune it later on. That's a good question. Hang on to that and remind me if we don't address it directly when we get into textures. And actually, most of that you're definitely going to be dealing with in substance.
Yeah.
which is why we do it in Substance. We're going to do a little bit in Photoshop too.
I'm having trouble bringing it into the hypershade and like wiring it just right into the Pixar surface.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. We're going to bring in all the maps. The only difference between Photoshop and Substance, really, Substance is a 3D painter. It makes all the maps at once. Photoshop, we have to generate them one at a time. We generate them off the same source. So you get real good at understanding what do I need for that map out of that source.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like Photoshop will simplify it a little more.
So, well, that's why I like to do Photoshop first, because it's kind of old school, but it's manual labor as opposed to one button done. You really do need to know what's going on under the hood, so if stuff doesn't work right, you can fix it. And a lot of times, like, true texture artists are not just going to go into Substance, paint it once and forget about it. They're going to paint it, and then they're probably going to tweak those maps individually to get the look they want. And remember, you're dealing also, let me get nerd out a little. So in Substance, you're going to be looking at it in iRay. Whereas in Maya, you're going to be looking at it in RenderMan. They're going to treat them slightly differently. In Substance, you're going to be dealing with a Substance material. Whereas in Maya, we're taking those maps from the Substance material and putting them on a Pixar surface and plugging them into slightly different parameters. So the look, while it will be the same, will have some differences. And, I don't know if I told you, but Pixar is actually working toward a plugin for Substance, so that you have a choice between iRay and RenderMan. You can see what the tech. You can take a Pixar surface into Substance and paint on it and see what it looks like.
Because I just was messing with that in Substance, where it's like you can click to make a Pixar or Disney surface, and it is not working the way it's showing online. At least after hours of messing with it, I couldn't get it to work that way.
Yeah, and also you have to remember, Substance by default uses a PBR workflow, which means instead of specular, you've got metallic.
Yeah.
Roughness is still roughness. Height is still height, whether it's a bump map, a normal map, or a displacement.
Not to get too far off what we're doing, but I've been taking, like, say it's wood, so I use the basic Pixar surface. The preset for like a cherry wood, because the specular is shinier on that.
Right.
And then I put in my base color and roughness and map through Substance onto there. That's been the flow I've been trying to do.
All right. Well, I know about the presets. I don't use them, and I discourage you in this class from using them because you need to know how to build them from scratch. If you don't know how to build it, you're going to be taking somebody else's material, and if it's not working for you exactly, you're not going to know what to do to fix it. So if you know how to build it from the ground up, then when you use the presets, you can go, it's too rough, too specular, not specular enough. You know what to do to fix it. Okay. So, roughness. Right now, we are looking at a diffuse material. So, how do you make a diffuse material rougher? Well, increase the roughness in the diffuse section, yes, but what is it going to do? So here's my take on it. So this is the standard diffuse material. So I'm going to kick off the IPR again, and I'm going to take my diffuse roughness and crank it all the way up. So what happens to it is it takes on sort of a powdery look. Whereas, let me go back to my diffuse my base diffuse. There's my base diffuse. So it kind of evenly distributes that reflection across the whole surface. With roughness on, diffuse roughness, it kind of takes those highlights and pushes them more towards the edges and leaves the center more flat looking. For want of a better description, it makes it look like a powdery surface. Like a powder coat does that. Why? Because when you hit something with a powder coat, it's got like more microscopic irregularities on it, but it's mostly noticeable on the edges. And if you drop like baby powder or talcum powder on a tabletop, what will happen usually when you look at it down, the edges of your pool will usually be a little bit higher than the center. Things usually will pull up towards the edges. You know, you get little specks of powder that build up towards the edges where there's a little well in the middle. And that's kind of what this is meant to mimic. It's meant to take your diffuse surface and make it more powdery looking. So again, here's the standard diffuse, and then diffuse roughness. Almost looks sort of like suede. Suede always has that kind of powdery look to it. Although with suede, you run your hands on it and it creates that little streak because you're taking all the little follicles and just kind of flattening it in one direction. And you can take it and smooth it back in the other. But this sort of looks suede powder. Now, here's the thing about this. We generally don't use this with primary specular. This is one of those deals where if you've got a surface that looks powdery but is not specular, this is what you use. If you mix and match the two, a lot of times you're going to, especially in the beginning, you get lost. It's like, well, I got diffuse specular, or I got diffuse roughness up, I got primary specular up. Why doesn't my surface look right? 9 times out of 10, turn off the diffuse roughness and just work with the spec roughness. Does that make sense? Now, I'm not saying you'll never want to do that. Like, I encourage you to experiment, but most of the materials you're going to run into are not going to have both on. It's going to be a rare case where you've got a powdery looking surface that's very reflective. Most of the time that powder coat is to knock down reflectivity. So that's what it does. So pretty cool. Special usage. File that under special usage. Like suede or powder coated metal or something like that. Okay. So, questions? We're going to get into the physical part of the material. I want to go through the artistic a little more. Yes, sir?
For edge color, you can change the actual color, but wouldn't it?
In the artistic mode, no, because the color should be coming from the base, the diffuse.
Okay, gotcha.
Only in metal do you change the edge color. The edge color, because there is no face color in metal, which is physical, that's the primary visibility. That's basically the amount of specular reflectivity. So for metals, and we're going to demo that too. We're going to make copper or brass or bronze, one of those. Show you where to plug the color into. But that's it. Like colored metal, that's pretty much it. The only other thing you might do it for is, and I purposely didn't give you guys reference for the thermos. I gave it to you as just a plain unpainted one. But something like this is a lacquer coat on it. It's still, you can tell it's metallic. It does not feel, when you look at it, like it's plastic. And that's because it's physical, it's metal, and the color is actually going to be in the edge color. So this would be a rare instance where we would plug in a color because this is lacquer coated. But you can still tell the material properties through the lacquer. It's one of those things where the paint doesn't cover it. It's like a translucent type of paint where You still know the base property, but you can see the colors different. Make sense? Okay, so we're going to do an exercise here. We are going to try to recreate the 3 different levels of reflectivity and roughness of the mouse that I used in the slides. All right, so what I'm going to do is just bring those up. We're going to use them as reference. And let me zoom in a little bit here. There we go. I'm going to pull them off to the side. All right, so I can see my sphere enough. I'm going to use the sphere as my guide just because it's fairly close to the shape of the mouse. So, first off, what do we have here? What do I need to do to get this? What's my base?
Make it darker.
Okay, how?
The color, bring it down. Are you saying not adjusting like material or?
Well, what do I want to do to my material to get that look?
Did you adjust the what was the gain? The other word for gain that we can say that are different from the day. It's not the gain.
No, because this is going to have diffuse in it.
The beat is and
Can we adjust the face? Oh,
no. Okay.
Well, we could adjust.
Yeah.
What are we adjusting here?
The V. I can't remember what it's
Value.
value. Yeah.
Okay.
Value, just adjust.
So basically, yes. It's hue, saturation, value. Hue is the color, saturation is the dominance of the color, value is the lightness and darkness of the color. So, and let me see if I can make this a little smaller so we can sort of see that. Good. All right. It's all a juggling act between trying to, with tiny, tiny real estate here. All right, so we want to make the color darker.
not too dark or?
Well,
I mean, too dark.
is it pure black?
No.
Automatically, even if you can't see the color, you should say no. Because that right there is Vanta black. There is no light getting out of that. So, that is closer to what we're after, believe it or not. All right, now, a lot of times I'll go in and I will, once I get down pretty low, I will go in and I'll go, you know what, maybe I'll go adjust it a little darker. It's got to have a little bit of lighter value in it, or it's not going to be natural. All right, so what do we want to do next? Edge color, what do we want to do with it? All right, edge color, let's crank it up. So now you turn up the edge color. Now it starts to look a little bit like my edges over here. Now, granted, the environments are not going to be the same. You know, can't do anything about that, but we can try to get it as close as we can. So now what do I want to do? Bring down the roughness. Okay, good. I like that. So bring down the roughness. How much do we want to bring it down? All the way. Not all the way. Well, no, I'm just going by what you're telling me to do. All right, so the default is 0.2. Is there anything else we should do before we adjust the roughness? Wouldn't it be easier if we saw some of that reflectivity when we look directly at the sphere? Like I can here? Why is it we have no reflectivity here? Face color, yes. Now let's add a little face color. Wow, just adding a touch of face color really makes it jump out. Now, this is where it really comes down to fine tuning when you've got something that's really reflective but really dark. Because if I crank up that face color on a really dark surface, it's no longer a really dark surface. It's all about that fine balance between reflectivity, being able to see the reflections, and maintaining your dark color. So this is much less reflective in the face than you would think for a reflective material because it is so dark. Does that make sense? Right. Now, with this turned down, now we can start to dial in some of that roughness. Take it away, add more to it. All right, so I always like to start by, if I'm not sure, I don't do that, honestly. Who does that? I usually take what's there and cut it in half. If I don't like it, I cut it in half again. I'll keep dividing it so I have a plan of attack rather than just choosing random numbers. I go by the level. Half, twice as much, 3 times, whatever it is. All right, so how does that look compared to my reference? Reference looks a little smoother. Okay, so let's cut that in half again. Now, one thing I have to balance is my sunlight. Remember, that's a directional light. So it's not a very broad surface. Our sun's about 5 centimeters in the sky when we see it. This is on kind of a spherical, distorted shape anyway, so we're not seeing a whole lot of it. So it's going to get smaller. It's not going to be as spread out. Right, so what do we need to do? All right, if we want to make the face darker, I can do one of two things. I can try and take the diffuse color down, or I can try to cut down some of the face color. Now, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, like if I wanted to look more reflective but still be dark. So let's see what level of face color I have. So 0.018. So just for fun, let me stop my IPR and let's dial down that level on the face. So I'm just going to go from 0.018 to 0.010. Kick off my IPR and then compare the two. See which one looks closer or further away. So the question is, when I start dealing with face color, how much environment do I want to see in it? A lot of environment, and have it still be dark. So it looks like I kind of went the opposite way as far as my face color. So I'm going to put that back up to where it was. So maybe I try and dial this down a little bit more. How's that feel? That's what it was before. I took the diffuse color and made it a little darker. And I went into the actual color picker and turned the value down manually. I went into here and turned it down. It was at 0.010 and I turned it down to 0.005. So it made it darker and kept the level of reflectivity that I had in the face color. All right, so now is it still reflective enough? All right, so let's bring the face color up a little. Yep, just a smidge. All right, still maintaining that darkness. The blue in the sky, that's not bothering me because I can see blue from my computer screen here. So I got a lot of colors. I got red over here. So closer, close enough. Remember, we're never going to match it exactly because it's a different environment. All right, yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's pretty close. So I'm going to stop IPR so I can keep this. All right, so color, diffuse. That's where the color comes from. It's dark, very dark, but not Vanta black. Right? As far as the actual primary specular, edge color all the way up. Little bit of diffuse or a little bit of face color in there so we can see what it looks like when we render. We adjust the roughness, then we go back and we kind of tweak out how reflective it is and how dark it should be. It's kind of a back and forth between, especially since this is just a dark sphere. It's kind of monochromatic. It's going to be mostly diffuse color, face color, back and forth till I get the right blend. Does that make sense? All right, so for the next one, I'm going to use the same material. I mean, ideally, this would be a different part of my sphere, and it would be a, have a different material assigned to it. We're going to use the same one. So first off, what do we want to do to start working on this? Yeah, let's go diffuse color first. So what do we want to do with this?
I said base. But I didn't say face color.
Oh. All right, so we're going to go diffuse color. So probably lighter. Just going to eyeball it for now. Now what do we want to do? Roughness. So let's go back to the default 0.2. Rough enough? No? All right, good. I'm going to start cranking. I don't like the slider. I like numbers, so I'm just going to type in 0.3. Every time I increase it, it's going to blur the reflection, especially that highlight. So, rough enough? Alright, so let's try 0.4. Ah, now we're starting to get the spread of that highlight there. A little bit more face color? Yeah, I would say so, and I agree. Looks like we want to see a little more of that environment in there, just a touch. And I mean literally just a touch. All right, maybe the color is, my diffuse color might be a little lighter. So let me turn that up just a smidge too. Alright, so how's the roughness level? A little bit more? Alright, let's see how 0.5 goes. Well, if you get to the point where it blurs the highlight too much and you lose sight of the brightness of the actual light itself, you probably went too far. So I'm going to knock it back to 0.45. And it's still going to give me a little bit of a brighter spot in the middle and diffuse it enough. All right, how about the face color? See, that's the thing. When we start adding a lot of roughness, we may need to bring up the reflectivity a little more so we can see some of the environment in there. Yeah, I would agree. So let's bump it up another notch. As we bump it up, it's also going to lighten the color. It's going to work with the diffuse to lighten it. Enough? A little more? Yeah, I'm going to crank it up just a little more, just to see if I can get a little more of that blue off to the side. And again, if I add a little more face color, it's also going to lighten the look of my diffuse. All right, so what do you think?
You said the face color makes the diffuse color red.
Yeah.
So I would maybe make it a little darker than the diffuse itself, like that, or do you think that's appropriate?
Well, what I'm after is I'm just trying to get that overall kind of light gray color in there. The balance between the two, you could opt for a lighter diffuse color and maybe less face color, or more face color and less diffuse color. You know what I mean? You're going to be balancing the two, and it's whatever looks good. There is no like right or wrong balance. It's all about using your eye. You're artistic. That's why it's artistic. All right, so pretty close, right? Let's tackle the next one. So now I want to go for that rubbery look. So what is going to give me that rubbery look? Roughness? Anything else? Face color lower? Okay. Anything else? Yeah, the actual color is going to be a little darker. I would say this color is probably somewhere between the one we just did for the buttons and the very first one we did for the really glossy. It's not going to be as dark, but yet darker than the buttons. Yeah, so I'm just going to crank it down about here. All right, and was it you, Twix? You said knock the face color down? Knock the face color down? Yeah, I would probably agree with that. All right, let's try that. All right, so what do you think? Where do we go? All right, so you're saying add a little more roughness. Let's see what happens. Yep, that's what I got. The only thing I would say is there's a little more focus in the mouse itself here than there is here.
If you look at your clicks on the right.
Yep. It looks like, to me, it could use just a touch more face color. Just to focus, because as we add more roughness, it spreads it out a lot. And if we need a little more focus in the light reflection, we need a little more face color. So, yeah, I'm going to try 2.5 just to see what I get. And again, I like to go very small increments when I'm fine tuning. Yeah, I would agree. That really does take on a rubbery look. All right, so here's our properties. Smooth, reflective, little rougher, still has quite a bit of reflectivity to it. And then this one's much more rubbery looking, which means it's rougher and it's got less face color. All right, can you guys follow that workflow? Does that make sense?
Yes.
That can really work with any material you've got. You want to do the desk. Well, you can always say, all right, well, based on the exercises we did, how does the top of the desk measure against the back of the mouse buttons, or the rubber on the side? What would you say? top of the desk. Just looking at it. So let's start with diffuse color.
Yellow, faded yellow, white.
Yeah, kind of yellowy, beigey, faded, yeah. All right? How rough?
Medium rough.
As rough as the buttons on the mouse? All right, sort of. How about face color? Does it have as much reflective power as the buttons it would do? A little less. That's how you want you to approach doing something like that. Now, for today, you guys are going to find reference for every object in your scene. So you have something like this, and you say, well, wait, there's a wood grain there. What you want to do is find the average color, which you just described. It's beigey, tanny, faded yellow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So remember, we're not doing textures. This is all about what is the base color. And if you've got a pattern like our floor here, you want to put carpet on your floor, you want to use this, you take the average color. What color would it be? Gray. Yeah.
Like a bluish gray.
Okay, well, you could sample it using the eyedropper. You could go into Photoshop, sample the color, write down the numbers. You could use Maya's eyedropper. Maya's eyedropper works most of the time. I'll show you guys how to use it if you're not familiar with it. All right, questions? All right, so just doing this little exercise should give you a good idea of where you can go with this. The whole idea is when you look at your reference, figure out what's the color, how reflective is it, and how rough is it. And a lot of times, you know, you may have to start with a level of reflectivity you think is there, but you change it. It's all right. It's all part of the process. Get the color, edge color all the way up, face color, if it's very reflective, face color up until you can see reflection. And then dial in the roughness. And then adjust the face color. You're going to have to go back and forth a couple of times to get it. But start there. All right. Let's talk about metal now. All right, so what I'm going to do is going to take my Pixar surface and under primary specular, I'm going to change it from artistic to physical. And that pretty much blows everything but roughness out of the water. So I'm going to put my roughness back to the default of 0.2. My gain's all the way up. I'm going to give it the default Pixar surface color. There we go. All right. So in order to actually work with metal, and I'm tired of this thing bouncing around. No, go away. Right, what I want to do here is let's use the reference I give you guys. All right, so here's the refractive index database. So this is meant to be set up like a library. All right, you go into a library. Do you guys know what libraries are?
What?
Yeah. It's a big room with books stacked in an orderly fashion.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Or somebody's idea of heaven. All right, so this is meant to be like a library. You've got shelves where you've got categories. Okay, you got sci-fi, you got biographies, you've got autobiographies, you've got fiction, you've got horror, different types of material. Then you've got a book. So out of that whole section, you decide to go over to horror and you go to Frankenstein. All right, so you pull Frankenstein off the shelf and that is your book, right? Now you want to figure out, okay, in Frankenstein, where does the inanimate creature become the monster? So you go through the page and you see where they're experimenting with, electricity and, Dr. Frankenstein screams it's alive. That's your page. That's what pages are. They are how the material was measured. So the shelf is what kind of material. The book is what's the recipe for that material. So if you're looking for metals, you go under main, inorganic materials. Under book, you choose the type of metal. You want silver, you want aluminium, there's gold, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So choose aluminium. Notice that it changes the page down here. And I've got a whole bunch of models of how aluminium was measured. All right, so the one I've got here is 1995. There's one at 2015, 1996, 1988, 1974, 1971. The suggested one is 1995. So you try that one. You don't like it, try another one. So what this is going to do is, this is going to give you the index of refraction number for aluminium and the extinction coefficient. Basically, what is the secondary index of refraction for it? Now, these two numbers are what you're going to use in your recipe for making an aluminium sphere. So, back in Maya, first thing we want to do when we make metal is, first part of the recipe is turn the oven on. The oven in our case is turn off diffuse. You got to preheat the oven before you bake your cookies or whatever you're making. Pizza, whatever it is. Hot Pocket. No, you don't do Hot Pockets. You put them in the microwave. That'd be heresy. All right. So, gain off. Primary, specular, physical, edge color, all the way up. Now we're going to use the refraction index. So I'm going to click once on the refraction index color swatch and stop that. And down here under value, that's where I'm going to plug in 1.197. 1.197. Yes, I know there's an 8, but if you type an 8 in, there's only a 3-digit decimal. Right, so hue, technically that really should be 0. Saturation should be 0, and then just value. We're not adding any color to this at all. So far, so good? All right, so now we do the same thing to extinction coefficient. There's my number. So I click once on the extinction coefficient. Hue 0, saturation 0, value 7.048. My default roughness of 2 and render. So now that recipe should make your object reflect like aluminium. Now, it is a bit rough, so we can easily fix that. Nice, bright, sort of feels like aluminum. Aluminium. All right, let's pick another one. Gold, I want to save the color metals for last. Let's do a couple of the white metal. All right, steel. So did you find where steel is? Let's look under steel, steel, steel. No steel. Oh, they got tin. Tungsten? All right, well, let's try tungsten. All right, so notice the numbers are radically different for the index of refraction, or the refractive index and extinction coefficient. All right, so there's my model, 1988. Could go 2009, 1988. I'll stick with 1988 just to see what my default is. So, everything else is the same. Diffuse, gain, off, edge color all the way up. Going to keep the roughness the same just to compare the different properties. And we plug refractive index, so that's 3.831. And then we type in extinction coefficient, which is 0.904. Now if I render this out, it should look different than the aluminium. That definitely has a heavier feel to it. All right, so aluminium, tungsten. Let's do another one. What's it called? Under D? Yeah, I'm not seeing it here. However, down under other materials, we've got alloys. So let's try this permalloy, which is a nickel iron alloy. Or actually, we could try nickel too. Nickel's in there. Your choice. What do you want to do? Let's go with nickel iron. See what that looks like. Alright, so nickel iron. My refractive index is 2.492. My extinction coefficient is 4.072. And render it out. A little bit brighter than tungsten, not as bright as aluminium. All right, suppose you want something that is not in the list. So for example, here's my travel. This is stainless steel. This is also brushed metal stainless steel with all kinds of other stuff in there, like little rivets, or I don't even know, these divots sticking out like that. So what happens if you don't have a recipe in that refractive index for stainless steel? Just because it's not in the refractive index website doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So ask your favorite browser a question. You know, refraction index stainless steel. There we go, stainless steel. Very first one, Filmetrics. All right, so these guys make it. And as part of their quality control process, they measure the purity of their metal using the index of refraction, extinction coefficient, the standard refractive index information. So here is their recipe for stainless steel. Do we need to know what kind of alloy is in stainless steel? What makes it stainless? Nope, don't care. Just want to know refractive index, extinction coefficient. All right, so refractive index is this number right here. 2.756, and the extinction coefficient is 3.792. Well, let's dial them in and see what we get. All right, so 2.756. Extinction coefficient 3.792. All right, so again, a little different than all the other recipes that we've got here. Now, some of these index of refraction numbers are going to change, even though we're calling these all white metals. It's going to change sometimes the hue of it, so it's going to appear a little bluer than others. I mean, there's a very subtle difference here. This is the nickel iron, and this is stainless steel. That one's tungsten, that one's aluminium. They all kind of have their own personality. All right, questions? Suppose we want to make this into brushed metal. So whole idea was I found out what the material was, I found out the recipe for it. Now I want to make it. So what I want to do now is figure out let's make it brushed metal. And let's say that we've got horizontal brush strokes on it. So first thing I'm going to do is come down here under advanced and take my anisotropy and drag it left. And notice it took my highlight and stretched it a little. But the thing that really makes brushed metal is the roughness. So here's the default roughness. Notice as I add more roughness, now it starts to stretch out my model. Right, so here's my anisotropy at 0. Here it is with it turned on. So now, the rougher we make it, the more stretched it's going to be. Can you guys see that? Right, so this is with anisotropy turned on. And let me do a render with it turned off at 0, just for comparison. So that's the same settings with anisotropy at 0. You guys see that? All right, so now let's see what it looks like with the roughness level I've got set, anisotropy turned on, and let's switch over from Beckman to GGX. And that is still under advanced specular model. Let's go GGX. So it kind of adds to that whole roughness, softness kind of thing. That starts to feel a lot more like brushed metal. Now granted, sun doesn't make the best light source, at least CG sun anyway. Kind of looks like it's got a crack in it or something. All right, questions? Does that make sense? All right, so if you've got brushed metal, anisotropy, chances are your brush strokes are probably going to be horizontal. If they're horizontal, it's -1. If they stretch, or if your highlight stretches horizontally, then you need to change it to +1. All right, let me stop this. All right, so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to turn off anisotropy for now. Knock my roughness back to the default. Turn my specular model back to Beckman. And let's make copper. All right, so I'm going to go under the main for simple inorganic, and I think copper's in here. There we go, there's copper. All right, so I'm going to go in, plug in my refractive index. This is relatively low numbers. So this is 0.218. And extinction coefficient, that's still pretty high. It's actually a little higher. So 3.823. Let's render it out. All right, you say, yeah, it doesn't look at all like copper. That's because we don't have any color in it yet. So, color. We need reference. I'm going to go to images in Google and go copper. Nope, not Cooper, copper. Apparently, I want a Mini Cooper. All right, now, when you guys are looking for reference, here's something that's absolutely crucial. Find reference of an object similar to what you have in your scene in an environment. Similar to your environment. Meaning, if it's daytime, find something that's similar during the day. If it's inside, find an inside reference. Somebody who took a picture of an object like yours during the day inside. You want to avoid matrix pictures like this because there's no visible environment. There's no real sense of where the light source is coming from. It's mythical. It's magical. No, I don't want a Mini Cooper. Go back. There we go. All right, so, I mean, that's an interior, but I'm outside, so I want to try and find outside reference. There's something outside. That's got that little bit of patina on it. When copper gets kind of tarnished, it turns sort of greenish. That's cool, but I don't necessarily want that. What I'm interested in is this in here. That kind of pure copper color. So what I'm going to do is hopefully download this image. Just by right-clicking, downloading, there we go. Good. Now, I could try to eyeball this in Maya and spend a lot of time doing that. Or I could use Maya's advanced color picker, bring the image into that color picker, and sample the color. I think I'll do that. Because I'm lazy. Actually, no, I'm efficient. That's it. That's what we call it. All right, so here's the question. Where does the color for copper go? Edge color, absolutely. Why not diffuse color? Okay, well, there's another even better reason. Anybody? Why wouldn't I plug it into diffuse? This is metal. First thing we do to make metal is turn off diffuse. So diffuse has absolutely no effect at all. Remember, this is all about what is the light reflecting back to us. Copper is considered one of the red metals. So we're seeing primarily reddish, yellowish, orangey color coming back. So you're absolutely right, edge color, but you have to defend it. All right, so what I'm going to do is double click. When you double click, that brings up a standalone window with, for want of a better word, advanced color picker, as opposed to that little floating quick pick. Now, here's the cool part about this. In the center here, under color wheel, there are some tabs. You want to click image and then load your reference image in. And I've got mine on the desktop. Right here, load it in and left click and sample. And you want to sample from an area that's not too bright, like a highlight, not too dark with shadow, sort of, kind of, an average. Like that might be a little too dark. I'd like to go kind of over here towards this. Click done, and let's render it out and see how it stands compared to our reference. we can always adjust the color. But this should get us sort of in the park.
There's a gold.
Yeah, it's a little too nice looking. Meaning it's a little too light in color. Needs to be a little more saturated. So what I'm going to do is crank up my saturation a little. Yeah, I might need to adjust the hue also. So right now, this is looking a little yellowish. I think I want it to go more towards the reds. So let's try that. So bump it over towards the reds, and that is actually a lot closer. Now, what else could I do to make it look more like my reference? Yeah, roughness, definitely. Yeah, and I'm looking down here too, and it looks like maybe it's a little saturated also. So let's knock saturation down first. Yeah, it might be a little too much knocked down. Just a touch more. And then, yeah, let's see, maybe send it more towards the reds again. Yeah, not too much. It's a little pinky now. Yeah, let's take it back up just a little. Now, something else I can always do is, oh, I don't like that. Let's go back in and resample down here. Trouble is, that now is too red down there. That's not bad. May need to adjust it a little more. It might have a little too much value in it. Now, I'm never going to get it to look exactly like that because there's all kinds of fading and wear and tear on that thing. It's got maps on it for that kind of wear and tear. But I can sort of get the overall color for it. All right, now, color in metal only for the red metals. Copper, bronze, brass, gold. All the others are considered white metals or whitish. Right, does that make sense? Questions? All right. So let's kind of go over in a little more detail what you guys are going to be doing today. Today, Frank in lab is probably going to give you guys a really good, thorough discussion on finding reference and look development, because that's going to be key. Before you start throwing color and trying to make materials from memory, you need reference. Memory at best is full. We always remember things the way we want to remember them, rather than the way they actually exist. So, for today's exercise in lab, you are going to take a look at our SAL Look Development Guide. You can actually download this as a PDF. So we go over what look development is versus what reference is. Reference, look development, pretty much are the same thing. Now, the difference between Project 6 reference and Project 7 reference is technically going to be nothing. The only difference will be if you've got a pattern or you've got a visible material, meaning you've got a visible texture or you've got a visible, for example, the wall. It's got that orange peel. If you have something like that, you need a texture or a map for that. You need something like the floor, a pattern, a brick wall. You need a pattern. That's the only real difference between the two. And also, in Project 7, we're going to be adding dirt, grime, stains, things like that to it. All right, so, look development. Really crucial. So, what should your look development include? Well, it should tell you the color of your object, how reflective it is it transparent or is it opaque? Opaque meaning you can't see through it. And how rough is it? All of that you should be able to see in your look development. So, a couple examples. Interior scene reference. Kind of like the floor, going to use that. Kind of like the whole scene. There's your reference for the thermos. We give that to you. We also have a coffee cup, if you guys remember, on that little stand next to the sofa. That's not acceptable look development. Why?
The white background?
Yeah, white background, it's magical matrix. I don't know where the light's supposed to be coming from. We really want to have it in an environment, and that's key for good look development. So here's an exterior shot. It's got look development in it. There's bread that's going to be on the table in the outdoor scene. Got some wood tables, chairs. We've got wine and cheese. Tablecloth. We don't have a tablecloth in our scene, but tablecloth, not good look development. Needs to be on a table in an environment so you can see how it reacts with the environment. All right, so for the outdoor scene, you want to avoid cheese reference that looks like that. That looks like something out of Tom and Jerry cartoon. All right. These holes for Swiss cheese, they would have to be modeled in order for that to be accurate, because they are going to tell you what is in light and what is in shadow. And if it's a 2D image, no matter how you change your light or where you put it, it's never going to match your environment. So you need to find good reference. All right, top one on the right, it may show you some texture, but that's really not look development. That is a flat texture. That might be all right for the texturing phase. But for you trying to describe what's the property of my cheese, what color is it, how rough is it, how reflective is it, that's not going to do it. That would do it. It's in an environment, it's on a board, you can see how it reacts. Now, when we get into glass, we're going to go over this again on Monday. When we get into glass, this is okay as a secondary reference. Meaning, I want to see what these bottles look like in an environment, but then I really want something like this so I can color pick it and get pure colors. Because a lot of times when you have bottles in an environment, you're going to get color coming through, and it's going to kind of tint how you see that color. It's going to change the hue a little bit. It's going to change how it's reflecting. It's going to change its value. Make sense? All right, outdoor scenes, got a wine bottle. You want to avoid this kind of stuff. For one thing, our bottle's empty. There's no liquid in it. Our wine glass, though, on the other hand, is glass and there is liquid in it. We'll get into that when we talk about glass, because liquids and transparent, transmissive glass objects are treated pretty much the same way. But this is what you're looking for reference. Color, how reflective is it, how rough is it? Nice thing about glass is Pixar Surface has its own section for glass. Glass is considered physical also, but instead of putting it up with the primary specular, they threw it into its own attribute. All right, we have a cutting board that we have where the cheese is on. We're not doing plastic because that involves translucency and subsurface scatter. You can see light penetrates this. It doesn't look like light's bouncing off of it all the way. You can see light is penetrating through it. It's kind of spreading out. That's the nature of this type of plastic cutting board. So our cutting board is going to be wood outside. And also, when we get into substance, that's going to be one of the exercises we're going to do in substance. You guys are going to be adding wear and tear and things to the cutting board if you're doing the outdoor scene. All right, so cheese. So take a look at this doc. Take notes when Frank talks to you guys about finding reference, because he's going to go into it in a whole lot more detail than I have time for. All right, questions. So today in lab, you're going to do interior, exterior scene, whatever you had finished for lighting in Project 4. 2. You're going to do, well, first off, you're going to start to look for reference before you start throwing color and materials on everything. You need to have a game plan, and finding reference is going to be what it is. So if you want to start with, say you want to do the interior, start by trying to find reference for the table, the floor, the sofa. And if you're dying to try making materials, find reference for it and then see how it goes trying to make a material for it. But you might be better off trying to find all your reference and then start making materials. The workflow I'm going to leave up to you guys. Now, in this project, you guys have some creativity. Because we're not telling you you have to make this kind of fabric, you have to make this kind of material. That's going to be based off of the reference you find. Also, I would suggest go take a look at the Zen garden so you can see what those materials are. Right? I'll give you a hint. It's probably going to be concrete, steel, and wood. But you need to see like what kind of age is the wood? How rough is it? How reflective is it? Because like twice a year they go out there, they sand down the tables on it, and they put a coat of lacquer and stain on it. Looks great for about 2 weeks. And then in Florida sun and rain, it looks like it does now.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I would rather texture what's out there now than a nice clean thing, because it looks much better in CG when you have stuff with wear and tear. It starts to look more natural. So go take a look on break either today, sometime before the end of this project, so you can get a feel for what you're actually going to be dealing with outside. Now, we've got the sofa modeled in there, so you can go look at those sofas back there. Depending on whether it's rained or not, I would not advise sitting on them because they get wet. I've seen people sit down and then they get up and their whole back is wet. Remember, it's Florida. It rains. All right, questions? All right, so go to lunch, come back to lab at 6 o'clock.